Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves has cast a charm spell on critics and fans alike, and a big part of the fun is questing after all those D&D Easter eggs.
I got a good feeling about this.
Spoilers ahead. An important tool a dungeon master has at their disposal during a campaign, especially if the players are stuck or need some guidance, is creating a non-player character or NPC that can help out. Special NPCs can be especially useful if the dungeon master needs the players to be saved from what would otherwise be a potential TPK or total party kill encounter, where without intervention from an NPC, all of the players' characters would end up dead. Essentially, Zenk seems to be an NPC who is plot relevant for one specific section of the film and leaves when his role is fulfilled, even if it doesn't make much sense narratively. Why does Zenk leave our heroes to battle the world-ending threat on their lonesomes when he's obviously more skilled and capable than them? The argument could be made that due to Edgin's past as a Harper, Zenk felt the quest was in good hands and he was needed elsewhere. However, it's much more fun to imagine Zenk as a powerful NPC controlled by the dungeon master of this story to move the plot along. In Dungeons & Dragons, players use their custom characters to roleplay an epic adventure. This can include fighting monsters, discovering ancient relics, and trying to avoid deadly traps. In fact, avoiding deadly traps is a major component of playing a standard Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Dungeon masters will often have fun devising complicated and convoluted ways to navigate these various traps. The puzzles can also be overly complicated by ambitious or possibly even vindictive dungeon masters who want to make their players sweat. Towards the middle of Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, Zenk leads the protagonists into a secret underground dungeon to find yet another ancient magical relic. Once they reach a stone bridge, Zenk explains that to cross the bridge, the heroes will have to do things like walking on evenly numbered tiles, then go back and forth to retrace their steps, something that would require charts and tables to complete successfully. However, all the techniques Zenk mentions are real tricks and examples from D&D modules, which gives the scene a metatextual layer of humor to those who have played with those kinds of dungeon masters.
I may have triggered the mechanism. So, sorry.
In a classic Dungeons & Dragons game, as the players explore a particular dungeon, city, or forest, they will always have a party order, defining who is in the front and the back of the line. This is because if an attack encounter occurs, it helps the dungeon master visualize who to attack and flank initially, though miniatures and a board help with this as well. Now, in a regular campaign, especially when all the players are relatively low level, it's a good idea to keep magic users, whether they're sorcerers or wizards, in the back of the party so that they're safer from enemies. That's because while magic is indeed powerful, the magic users themselves aren't very good in a fight and can't take much damage. This is why their classes are often called glass cannons. With this in mind, it's pretty clear that the filmmakers behind Honor Among Thieves are aware of how to play the game itself. For instance, at one point, after the heroes are tasked with going into a secret passage to a dangerous underground ruin, the half-elf sorcerer Simon bluntly states,
I'll go last.
It's a funny line, but it's also a nod to the logic of the game, namely that Simon will need to be protected if the party is attacked. Simon Omar has one of the most profound character arcs of the film, starting out as a struggling magic user and becoming adept enough to help save the world from the evil red wizard Sofina. The surname Omar should get die-hard Dungeons & Dragons fans' attention. It turns out that Simon is canonically related to Elminster Omar, a prominent magic user in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting for D&D. In the film, Elminster is Simon's ancestor who shows up when Simon puts on the magical helmet and attempts to attune with it. Elminster then taunts Simon, telling him that he isn't worthy of the Omar name. The Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game offers players a wide variety of settings, scenarios, character types, and just about everything else a dungeon master and group of heroes could need. One of the most popular D&D settings is Forgotten Realms, which features many of the creatures, locations, and notable characters that you might think of when you picture a D&D game. In Forgotten Realms, Baldur's Gate is one of the many major cities that DMs can set their campaign in, as well as the name of the hugely popular third-person isometric series of adventure games of the same name. Meanwhile, Neverwinter is another important location in the Forgotten Realms setting. A large, bustling port city, it's also the main setting for the critically acclaimed Neverwinter Nights video game series, which is yet another third-person isometric action game. The events of Honor Among Thieves are confirmed to be set in the city-state of Neverwinter, and the film name-drops Baldur's Gate more than a few times as well. Referencing both of these settings by name gives the film an extra level of specificity, as well as delighting the old-school D&D fans in the audience. In the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop game, if a player rolls a 20, it's a critical success, and the player automatically succeeds at their task. However, if they roll a 1, it's an automatic failure, and the results are often hilarious. As one fan put it on Twitter, everyone expects D&D to be Lord of the Rings, but it always turns into Monty Python and the Holy Grail. There are specific references to Holy Grail in Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, such as Simon saying, "I got better," to the incredulous Red Witch. It can't help but remind a viewer of John Cleese's classic line delivery.
She turned me into a newt! A newt. I got better.
There is also Forge's gaudy balloon that hovers over his city throughout the film, which has a very Terry Gilliam-esque art style to it, as do the closing credits. The main villain of the film Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves is Sophina, the evil Red Witch of Thay. During a flashback set before the film, we see Sophina hire Ed, Holga, Simon, and Forge to steal an ancient artifact for her in a secret dungeon. But Sophina ends up betraying the team by trapping Ed and Holga in a time-stop spell. Later, it's revealed that she was in cahoots with Forge the whole time. In the interim, Sophina's magical advice helps Forge amass riches and political power, while she forces him to set up an event that will get his town ready to be sacrificed in a dark ritual for her even more evil master. Turns out that master is none other than Szass Tam. That name should get die-hard fans of D&D lore excited because in the oft-mentioned Forgotten Realms setting from the tabletop game, Szass is kind of a big deal. In fact, he's one of the most powerful liches and necromancers in the game's universe, commanding a legion of undead at his beck and call. And although his plans are thwarted by our heroes at the end of the film after they collectively defeat his servant, Sophina, he is still out there and could possibly return for a sequel to terrorize the heroes once more. One of the most fun aspects of starting a Dungeons & Dragons campaign is the ability for players to create their characters from scratch. Players can choose to have elaborate and tragic backstories, humorous and silly histories, or even dark and mysterious pasts that are slowly revealed throughout the game. The possibilities are practically endless. Due to D&D being told via pen and paper and good ol' imagination, it means that players aren't limited by much when it comes to defining their roles. That means it's very easy for player backstories to become overly convoluted and long-winded. This is parodied multiple times throughout Honor Among Thieves. One such instance finds Ed and Holga being granted a hearing after 2 years stuck in a high-security prison tower. Ed gives an entire spiel about his tragic past as a Harper, leading to the death of his wife, with the fantasy creature parole officers getting bored and annoyed in the same way other players in a real D&D game might. Ed even does the same thing to Zenk later in the film when the paladin intones, "Long ago," getting ready for a long lore dump until Ed angrily cuts Zenk off to get a move on. This isn't the first time that Dungeons & Dragons has been adapted outside the gaming table. In the 80s, Dungeons & Dragons was granted its own Saturday morning cartoon that ran on CBS for 3 seasons from 1983 to 1985. The show followed the exploits of a group of kids who find themselves transported into the dangerous and magical world of Dungeons & Dragons by a wizard with a unique name.
I am Dungeon Master, your guide in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons.
Regardless of its quality, it has its fans, and in 2019 there was even a car commercial with live-action versions of the characters in it. However, that wasn't the only time these characters have been seen in live action. Towards the climax of Honor Among Thieves, the film's heroes find that there are other groups of adventurers stuck inside Forge's dangerous maze. This includes the live-action versions of the 80s cartoon characters, complete with the same brightly saturated costumes as their animated counterparts. Critical Role is an extremely popular Dungeons & Dragons podcast, and there's a subtle Easter egg in the Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves film that alludes to it. In Critical Role, there's a fan-favorite character named Fresh Cut Grass, or FCG. In the film, after escaping the botched heist, the insecure sorcerer Simon is reintroduced, barely making ends meet, by performing sub-first level magical spells to an annoyed audience out in the middle of the countryside. This includes lighting his finger on fire like a candlestick and creating a fresh-cut grass scent from thin air. The spell's name is just a bit too specific to not be nodding at one of the most popular Dungeons & Dragons related media. 2023's Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves is not the first live-action film based on Dungeons & Dragons. There was a D&D film that starred Jeremy Irons, Thora Birch, and Tom Baker in 2000, 1 year before Lord of the Rings. There seems to be a very subtle Easter egg in the recent Dungeons & Dragons film that could be a reference to the misbegotten 2000 original. Early in the film, Ed and Holga meet up with Forge, who ends up betraying them and trapping them in a rug of smothering that acts like magical quicksand. This is similar to what led to a surprisingly grisly death in the 2000 film. While the Rug of Smothering comes from the original game, Honor Among Thieves could have used any other spell to subdue Ed and Holga, including the time stop spell Sofina used on them at the beginning of the film. That seems to have been a conscious choice by the filmmakers to pay homage to the earlier film. The Easter eggs in Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves aren't just relegated to the original games or various ancillary media surrounding it. There are also references to other films. This includes almost shot-for-shot homages to the 1993 Steven Spielberg-directed dinosaur-on-the-loose sci-fi disaster film Jurassic Park. Two scenes in particular seem to be direct riffs from the film. One occurs during a scene where everyone is running from an angry red dragon, and Doric falls and hangs over a ledge as the dragon attempts to chomp at her legs, which is framed almost exactly like the scene in Jurassic Park, where Lex dangles from an air vent as a velociraptor collects itself to jump up and attack her. Later, an arguably even more overt reference occurs during the climax in Forge's Maze. At one point, a dwarf goes to kill a panther-like displacer beast, but unfortunately the beast casts an illusion of itself with one of its magical back tendrils, and the real beast pounces on the old dwarf. It's a shot similar to the classic Jurassic Park scene where Robert Muldoon gets outsmarted by two raptors in Jurassic Park.
Clever girl.
Speaking of that red dragon, D&D diehards might recognize the powerfully pudgy beast. Named Themberchaud, this character from the D&D tabletop role-playing game is known to stalk the Underdark area of Gracklestew, aka the City of Blades. According to Out of the Abyss, Themberchaud trades his treasure-protecting services for the life of a pampered dragon. In lore, Themberchaud is intelligent, formidable, and a different kind of force to be reckoned with than his simpler and cuter presentation in Honor Among Thieves. This was intentional. The film's co-writer and director John Francis Daley told Polygon, "We really leaned into the fact that he's not like any other dragon you've seen before on film. And what was so cool is that it doesn't feel like we're betraying the source material by having a dragon so uniquely different because D&D itself is so unique." Simon is a wobbly young sorcerer suffering from a seriously limiting bout of imposter syndrome in Honor Among Thieves. As gratifying as it is to watch him grow more confident and firmer on his feet over the course of the movie, there's a name that never stops scaring him: Mordenkainen, of Arcane Seal of Mordenkainen fame. Mordenkainen's unbreakable seal protects the vault our party needs to bust into in order to nab the Tablet of Reawakening. In fact, if there's an arcane seal named after you in the world of D&D, you're probably a total baddie, just like Mordenkainen. In tabletop game lore, Mordenkainen is a masterful archmage responsible for creating countless powerful spells. To be the stuff of legend in a legendary game is no easy feat, which makes sense considering Gary Gygax created Mordenkainen as a player character in one of the earliest ever D&D campaigns, according to this archived Q&A with Gygax. In Honor Among Thieves, the Harpers are a secret society of good guys working as spies to protect the realms. Edgin signs up with the Harpers for their do-good brigade in an attempt to lend his bard skills to keeping the peace. Edgin even carries around their giant little book of oaths and pledges until he sours on the peanuts being a good guy tends to pay, and steals some unfortunately marked red wizard gold. Ed's theft not only sets him apart from the Harpers, but it ultimately costs him his wife, his home, and almost destroys his relationship with his daughter. Ed's feelings about his actions are complicated and more than a little shameful throughout the movie. Still, Zenk, a far more lawful good guy than Ed, encourages him to take up the mantle of Harper once more. Perhaps Zenk is inspired to keep Ed in the Harper game because of the sentiment shared in the Harper chant, recorded in Ed Greenwood's 1993 The Code of the Harpers. "We are the Harpers. We are the Lord Protectors of the Realms, fools all, but the gods look down and smile glory upon us. Weep for us, watch for us, and hope in us. We shall not fail thee." If you're someone who loves Honor Among Thieves but aren't super versed in D&D lore, Sophia Lillis's druid character Doric might seem the most fantastic of the entire ragtag gang. Doric's a tiefling druid, gifted with wild shape-shifting ability, has small horns, pointed ears, and is also a proud member of a society known as the Emerald Enclave. Viewers who are up on their D&D lore, however, know that the Emerald Enclave are the sworn protectors of nature, a druidic order that cares for the green children of the realms. While the society has its own circles of rule and gods not explored in Honor Among Thieves, the focus on protecting nature is shared both on-screen and in the tabletop RPG world. In the movie, Doric looks out a window at swaths of land destroyed by necromantic magic and urges her party to protect the land while there is still something to protect. Just like in real life, the environmentally focused Emerald Enclaves struggle for their concerns to be taken seriously by selfish spellcasters and crooked politicians alike, as shown both in Honor Among Thieves and the tabletop Dungeons & Dragons Forgotten Realms campaign. One of the joys of Honor Among Thieves is that it's entertaining whether you have an encyclopedic knowledge of D&D lore or are simply a fan of good times and Chris Pine. The movie is accessible and enjoyable to any level of viewer, but moviegoers on the hunt for Easter eggs won't be disappointed. One such example is the D&D version of profanity, uttered by a shocked soldier after Simon's image spell goes sideways. But what are the 9 Hells anyway? The 9 Hells are the D&D world's version of Hell. The 9 Hells of Beator boasts 9 layers. Each layer or plane has its own ruler and its own flavor. Fire, ice, astral hell, and bogs. There is truly a layer of hell for everyone in the 9 Hells. Tabletop players can take the highway to hell by playing the Dungeons & Dragons adventure Descent into Avernus. To some, Revel's End is the blink-and-you'll-miss-it name of the tower prison Edgin and Holga escape from using the power of Birdman Jarnathan. To others, it is the Panopticon standing sentry in Icewind Dale, carved from the windbreak overlooking the sea of ice heated by magical continual flames. Revel's End is used to bookend the movie Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves. The film opens with the aforementioned dramatic window-leaping escape and closes with the crooked Forge Fitzwilliam attempting to jump to his freedom the same way, only to crack right into a window bricked up by an absolution council that is slowly getting hip to its prisoners' ways. In the D&D tabletop games, Revel's End appears first in the prison break adventure Icewind Dale: Rime of the Frost Maiden. The adventure was developed by Wizards of the Coast to support the world the movie makers were developing. The book came out in 2020 while the movie came out in 2023, which makes Revel's End a sort of infinity loop Easter egg in both properties. The snowy stronghold is even harder to escape in these sessions, considered challenging to even experienced dungeon masters. Rime of the Frost Maiden features a dragon, terrifying ice monsters, and a sperm whale. And to us at least, getting to see Chris Pine ride one of those would have been quite the spectacle. One man's trash is another man's treasure, but in Honor Among Thieves, one man's treasure could also be a chest full of razor-sharp teeth and a snake-like tongue determined to sap the life force of anyone nearby. The treasure chest that Holga and the gang encounter in Forge's arena isn't a treasure chest at all. It's an old D&D villain called a Mimic. The Mimic first shows up in Dungeons & Dragons lore in the original Monster Manual, published by Gary Gygax in 1977, and has appeared in monster manuals ever since. Like quite a few early D&D villains, Mimics use shape-shifting and ooey-gooeyness to stun, deceive, and attack unsuspecting parties. In tabletop campaigns, Mimics get players that get too close into a sticky situation, literally. Hitting or kicking a Mimic only makes it bond more tightly to a player, which makes us happy Holga didn't try to land a punch on one in the movie. The Gelatinous Cube is a classic D&D creature that's part all-consuming monster and part Jello Jiggler. These monsters engulf unlucky players and deal out relentless acid damage to those unlucky enough to get up close and personal with the Gelatinous Cube. The disgusting danger of the Gelatinous Cube makes its use in a key Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves escape scene all the more delicious. Our heroes dive into the cube to escape Forge's games, and the Displacer Beast that's hot on their tails. Due to Doric's wild shape ability, she's able to wiggle out of trouble and yank the rest of the gang out. The Gelatinous Cube is an old D&D creature invented by D&D co-creator Gary Gygax, along with many other canonical characters for the legendary Greyhawk campaign. But it's had some brushes with movie stardom before. Notably, the Gelatinous Cube plays a role in a movie saturated with D&D imagery, Pixar's Onward.
A gelatinous cube!
Zenk leads our favorite band of ragtag thieves into the Underdark to find the Helmet of Disjunction, and even saying the name of the place seems to put a chill in Zenk's voice. If a subterranean environment sends a shiver up the spine of a businesslike and battle-ready semi-eternal paladin, it beyond terrifies the rest of the Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves gang. But hey, a quest wouldn't be a quest without at least one lair our heroes might never escape. Of course, the Underdark is also a setting for Dungeons & Dragons campaigns in the world of the tabletop RPG. It's a massive, layered network of darkened, demon-stuffed caverns and other hidey holes that feature in many campaigns. One of the creatures they encounter in the film, and an Easter egg itself, is the Intellect Devourer. These hideous little scamps boast brain-shaped bodies on webbed feet, and despite their looks, are fearsome living death merchants. The intellect devourers show up as true forces to reckon with in Underdark campaigns and the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop games. In Honor Among Thieves, Zenk warns the party that the approaching intellect devourers are more likely to attack prey with high intelligence.
Well, that's a little hurtful.
Filmmakers Jonathan Francis Daly and Jonathan Goldstein have stated in multiple interviews that they were influenced by fantasy comedy classic The Princess Bride when writing Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves. Now that's a true genre-bending. But we also see clear references to Ocean's 11 and other classic heist films. Honor Among Thieves uses the visual language of crime capers to set up the plan of the Great Vault Heist, and then launch us right into the middle of it not going to plan. There's also a classic D&D tabletop reference in the heist portrait the party uses to cover Simon's hither-thither staff-created portal. The man portrayed in this portrait is Volathamp Volo Gadarm, recognizable to D&D players for his in-world guidebooks to the realms of Dungeons & Dragons. Volo rates the various inns and locations he frequents with a pipe system, and his opinions can be sought out in many guidebooks. If Danny Ocean ever had to put a team together to infiltrate the Forgotten Realms, we bet he'd call on Volo. Who knew a hulking beast that is part bloodthirsty bear and part giant owl could be so cute? Move over, Cocaine Bear. There's a new cinematic bear in town based on a classic D&D creature, the Owlbear. Viewers new to the world of D&D will see the Owlbear in Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves for what it is, a powerful beast of ultimate cuteness and destruction. Longtime tabletop RPG players might have a bone to pick, however. In the movie, Dork is a tiefling druid who can transform into the Owlbear as part of her wild shape power. In the world of tabletop Dungeons & Dragons, this transformation wouldn't be possible because the Owlbear is classified as a monstrosity and not a beast. Classification has a different impact on the games than on the screen. Still, some tie-in prequel novels at least attempt to lay the groundwork for the impossible transformation, which should calm even those with extremely lawful evil alignments.